Alright, so my battery was low and I had to put my charger in. But we mixing this purple up. I'm going to add a little bit of water. Not too much. Because for mottling, I want that mottling to show up a lot. Not too much, but enough. I want it to make a difference. So I don't want to thin this out too much. I also don't want it super, super thick. I don't want it like deep purple either. So I'm thinning it out with some distilled water. And then before I put the paint on the baby, I am going to add some outdoor matte varnish. I always do that to my paints, and I believe that it gives the paint some extra adhesion to the kit and helps with the paint settling into the kit really good. And I can tell that that process is working for me because when I go to strip my kits, it takes me a long time to strip those kits. I let them soak in some alcohol and water sometimes, and now I'm even starting to boil water. But I'm very careful when I boil water because I'm not trying to melt my kit. I'm just trying to do enough to loosen that paint up and get it to come off. Okay, so I got my purple for, and again, if you add too much water to your paints, don't panic because you can always add more paint to your mixture or thicken it up a little bit. So it's not the end of the world if you dilute your paint a little bit. And the reason that you dilute the paint is because you want to put on thin layers of paint. Now this is crimson. I absolutely adore using crimson as a blood red color for mottling. It's one of my favorite colors to use for a mottling layer. The crimson to me is a perfect blood red. I don't have to try to mix paints to get that blood red color. To me, crimson automatically looks like it's a perfect blood red color for me for golden paints. And let me also say this, different brands of paint have different variations on the theme for colors. So, you know, that's why sometimes it's good to stick with your brand, because when you switch to a new brand, that same color might not look exactly the same. It might not be an exact match. So that's why with these limited edition kits, I try not to switch up too much on my process, because number one, I'm trying to perfect my process, but I also don't want to change up and then my process weakens and it, goes back to a lesser ability for me to make the type of babies that I want to make. So I hope what I'm saying is making sense. I might not be saying it exactly the way I want to say it, but mixing paint ain't no joke. Or, getting your products together is not no joke. And I learned the hard way. Spend a few extra dollars on your materials because you want the best, results. If you go cheap, you're going to get cheap results. So this golden paint is not cheap. Golden paints cost. At first when I started making reborns, I was using cheaper paints. And Look at how my babies was looking back in 2023. They wasn't looking too great. Now this is quinacridone magenta. I really love this color mixed with pink, mixed with a little bit of red for my blushing color. It really works well for me on my palms, my cheeks, my elbows, the knees, the bottoms of the feet. It gives it to me a pretty color, and it doesn't come out real dark because remember, I'm thinning this paint, but this is vibrant. When I mix those three colors together, the magenta plus the pink plus the red, it gives me a pretty blushing color. And then I can start off small with a very light coat of it, and then I can keep adding layers of it, and it can get overpowering. So I had to learn to not go crazy with this mixture, because even though it's potent and I want it to work, I had to realize, go one layer at a time, let it sit overnight, then maybe add a little bit more the next day. And that's the one thing I learned about air dry painting. Sometimes you need to let your layers sit overnight and don't add nothing else to it until the next day, because if you don't and you overdo it, once you get that air dry paint on there and it dries, if you don't really know how to lighten things up using the color wheel, you might as well strip it and start over. So this is a very vibrant blushing color that I'm making here. The red and the pinks and the magenta. Once I add the water to it, it's going to thin it out. And it's going to be really light pink when I oops, that's the part of being in this art, is it gets messy. Anywho, I'm mixing my paint up really good, getting that paint off the bottom. Now you will notice, well, I notice with golden paints and the distilled water and once I mix my varnish in, it doesn't matter whether I mix the varnish now or later. Overnight, this paint will settle at the bottom. It will separate sometimes from the water and settle at the bottom thick again. So over the next course of the weeks, when I go in to get my paints, it's good to re-stir your paint so you can get that vibrant color where you want it and thin it out. Because if you dip that paintbrush in the bottom and that thick paint has collected at the bottom, and you go to put that paintbrush on that baby and you don't realize that that paint residue at the bottom of these containers then thickened up, you're gonna be mad. Once you put that paint on too thick, you might as well strip it and start over, because you're not gonna get it off like that if you put that thick paint on there. Okay, this is quinacridone magenta. Now, so I got my veining color over here. So right above here, I'm putting these containers as I'm getting them done in here. And I usually take a dry erase marker or even a permanent marker, and I write on the tops of these what they're for. So this will be like a green undertone, blue veining. This is the purple mottling layer. This is the crimson mottling layer. And now this is the blushing color. So I will label the tops of them. And you can see that even though I use permanent marker, it come right off of these little tops. And you just relabel it nicely for the next time. So I usually label my containers. I'll do that at the end. But I'm still over here mixing paints. Now I just splattered this paint over here. Now this air dry paint wipes off easily if you get it in time. Some colors do stain after you leave them for a while, but air dry paint can come out pretty easy before you add varnish. Now once you add varnish, that's a whole different thing, because the purpose of the varnish is to help it stay on your kit. So the varnish is doing what it's doing, but right now it's no varnish mixed in my mixture. It's paint and distilled water, and in some instances it's multiple different colors of paint. So like for my blushing color, I got 3 different colors in there. For the green undertone, this time I mixed 3 different greens in there. I'm just experimenting, you know, to see what it's going to give me. Now usually when I start painting my babies, I start at the back of the head, so that if I don't like how something works, or I start at the neck or close to the, you know, a part of the baby that you're not going to readily see. And I do that because if I don't like it, I got time to change it before I get to the face and the more parts of the body that you see the most, right? So, you know, or you can do a test run, or you can have like a test part of a kit that you keep to test paints out and see how they look. But when I'm painting a baby, I usually start at the back. So this is burnt umber. I just bought me a new tube of burnt umber. And now I'm going to mix some burnt umber. And I think I'm going to do burnt umber by itself. And then I think I'm going to do burnt umber with raw umber. I'm going to mix those 2 together. And then I'm going to do burnt umber by itself. And we're going to see how that works. I got a nice clump of burnt umber because I want rich brown tones. Okay, so I'm going to mix my water in this. And then I'm going to stir till I see that the paint is mixed. Now, when I start painting later on next week, because I probably won't paint this weekend, because my weekend this weekend is pretty busy. Tomorrow I have a family gathering. And then Sunday is Mother's Day. So, of course, we're going to spend time with my mom. And then, so far, the kit that I'm working on, it is the Alessandro Awake kit that I'm working on. So far, I have washed the kit. I have alcoholed it twice. And next, I need to just do a coat of varnish on there. So I always do a layer of varnish and water just before I start painting, and give that varnish time to settle into the kit. So that is probably what I'm going to work on this weekend, and then give the kit some time to let that varnish settle into the kit. So this is my mixture of burnt umber all by itself. Now, one of the things that I do love about the paint settling at the bottom of your container is when you get ready towards the middle to the end of your painting, sometimes for the skin tone, that darker mixture of paint that's collecting at the bottom helps you with shading with paint. Now, I also have matte makeup powders that I use for shading as well, especially with the creasing. But sometimes for shading, I also shade with my paint. And sometimes that darker, thicker paint at the bottom does magic for you at the end. So this time I got burnt umber. And I'm going to also mix some raw umber with it. And I'm also going to mix some Azo Gold, Quinacridone Nickel Azo Gold in this. All right. So and I might do the burnt umber and the raw umber, and then a separate one with burnt umber, raw umber, and Quinacridone Azo Gold. I think I'm going to do a separate one. And what that gives you is a variety of browns to work with, because depending on the direction that the baby is going in and the features of the baby, one of these browns might work better than the other one, and you might be like, you know what, this is the one that I need, and this is the one I'm going with, and then use the other ones later on as you get towards the end. It depends, or you might not use them at all, depending on, you know, the features of the baby or whatever. So sometimes I mix 3 different skin tones to give myself some options, because that's really working out for me when I give myself some options. But, you know, hopefully maybe this helped somebody with some ideas about air dry painting, because I air dry paint. For health reasons, I do not do heat set. I just don't think that's the way to go for me. As a child, my mom's side of the family had issues with asthma really bad, and I haven't had that, thank the Lord, but I have suffered with bronchitis sometimes, and so that's close enough, because even with bronchitis, you have to have an inhaler sometimes. So it's been a long time since I had the need for an inhaler, and I'm so thankful to God for that. But my allergies act up a lot. I have really bad allergies sometimes. So as you can see, this is on the like browner side, but remember, you want to layers of paint and you want to build. So I think I'm going to add a little bit more water to that and mix, and you will know when you go to put that paint on that. Oh no, that's good. When you go to put that paint on that cosmetic wedge, that cosmetic wedge is going to tell you everything you need to know. And sometimes you need to take your paintbrush and thin that paint out on that cosmetic wedge before you touch that kit, because if you put that thick paint on there and you can't pounce it down in time, you might as well strip it, because it's not going to give you an even layered skin tone. So I want to put this to the side because that's burnt umber and the raw umber. And then this time So I kind of put that to the side because I don't want that to get confused with just the burnt umber only. So I want to kind of remember. And then on this side, I'm going to put, on this side with nothing over here, I'm going to put this next mixture of burnt umber, raw umber, and the Azo Gold. And then after that, I'm going to get off of here because this is a long video of me mixing paint. So I'm going to put a little burnt umber. And then I'm going to put a little bit of raw umber. Tonight, I had a taste for Chinese food. I had some shrimp fried rice. And it was so good. And I found this place that sold the Chinese food. And not only is it a carry-out, but it is a full-fledged restaurant. So I am going to try to talk my husband into going there and we eat and dine in one time. Nice little place I found. And they have outdoor seating for later on in the year. But I got some shrimp fried rice tonight, and it was pretty good. Okay, I don't want that in there. I want that out of there. All right, let's see. Okay, there's a little, oh, okay, not too much of that. So that Azo Gold has a tendency to lighten up your browns a lot and add like a golden look to the babies. You can see it's kind of orangey gold sometimes, that Azo Gold. But when you mix it in with your brown paints and you thin it out, sometimes, you know, it gives it that like a golden look. So I really like that look. But sometimes, depending on the kit, you might not be going for the golden look. So that's why I give myself some leeway of different colors to mix together. And if you've been following me in my baby making for a while, you know I have been trying to achieve like a chocolate drop, but I have not gotten there yet, and I'm not giving up. I'm just taking my time because achieving a chocolate drop is not easy. It takes a lot of skill and know-how, and I'm gonna get there with air dry paint, but I'm gonna get there slowly, and I gotta figure it out. And I think that's the whole fun of this, is experimenting, right? The experimentation of all of this, just trying to find your own way, trying to figure out what works for you, you know. Still trying to give, you know, put your best foot forward and be, you know, as professional as you can, and, you know, not wasting the kits, not wasting the materials, doing a great job. That's what, you know, that's the goal. But you got to experiment to figure out your own way, you know, like what works for you. Yes, while I watch tutorials and I'm learning a lot about what works and doesn't work, at the end of the day, I still got to figure this out on my own. You know, after the tutorial is over, somebody can show you how to do something all day long, but you got to figure out how to do it. You got to figure out how to put your own flavor on it. And even if you follow them step for step, them first couple of times, that baby do not, I'm a witness, that baby do not come out looking like this. It just don't. So I watch to learn best practices and skill and what I want to, you know, just ideas. But mostly I'm in here experimenting on my own, trying to figure out what's going to work best and creating my own style for my babies, or, you know, having a look of for my babies that's mine. So with that being said, everybody have a great evening. Thank you for joining me. This was a different type of video for me today. I don't typically, you know, do videos this long. showing me, you know, doing the process, but I'm trying to grow myself and trying to be a little bit more vulnerable on camera. And it's going, you know, eventually I will perfect it and get a little better. But thank you for your patience, and thank you for joining my channel, and thank you for your support. Have a good night. Bye.